Welcome to the Athens Politics Nerd podcast. Today, we're talking with Jessica Fore, who has announced that she's running for Congress in District 10. But before we invite her on, I wanted to say something really quick about Athens Commission District maps. I've got an article about it up on my website, athenspoliticsnerd.com, that you should check out if you haven't seen it already. This redistricting process has been such a train wreck so far. It overturns democracy locally. There's no other way to put it. And if you're a progressive, you should be even more alarmed. In this cycle, we could see Republicans being elected to the commission, especially if no one else runs in some of these new districts. If you run unopposed, you automatically win, no matter who you are. This could undo all of the progress that's been made in the past few years. We'd be going backwards. So, if you live in Forest Heights, Winterville, or off Timothy Road, we need you to run for office. Like, get ready now. This is an emergency. Your city needs you. Now let's talk with Jessica Fore, someone who is standing up and is ready for public service. She put out a great campaign video the other day. Let's take a listen.
We're at a pivotal moment in our nation's history. It isn't neighbor versus neighbor. It's all of us as Americans coming together to defend our democracy against abusers of power. Our constitutional republic, our right to vote in free and fair elections, has been the aspiration of the free world for generations. My grandfather and grandmother were World War II Army veterans who risked their lives for these ideals. Are we going to let it all go now for narcissistic delusions and political bootlicking by people who will do anything for power and control? Let's tell a more redemptive story. We need to pull our nation back from the ledge, restore the honor and integrity of our elected offices, and secure a stable, prosperous future for our children. All of them. I'm a local realtor, church worship leader, and I'm involved in abuse victim advocacy. So I know a thing or two about what we're dealing with. I'm Jessica Fore. I'm running for Congress, and I approve this message.
Hi, Jessica. Thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm very glad to be with you.
So I have to admit, I was excited to hear that you were running. You released this amazing campaign video the other week, which I think has really distinguished you from the other candidates at this point in the race. But first, tell us a little bit about yourself before we get into the political stuff.
Sure.
So yeah, tell me about the road that led you to this point.
That could be a very long conversation. Just basic stuff about me. I'm from Georgia originally. I'm from Macon. I've been in Athens for pretty much my whole adult life, and it's actually a little bit weird for me to be contemplating. Well, for me to be not just contemplating, but running for office because I am definitely a creative person. I'm a musician. I'm self-employed as a real estate agent, and then I have a church music gig that I play on Sundays, and have kind of gone to pretty great lengths to minimize institutional sorts of claims on my time. And so the idea that I would ever, be someone who would like put on a suit and go work for an institution with all of my productive time is something that is kind of foreign to me, except for the fact that I feel like we're in such a critical moment for our country. Where what's at stake is the basic stability of our democratic republic. And the road that got me here during the previous administration, the perspective that I had on that presidency and on sort of the way that things were evolving in the country was rooted in a specific framework, a specific knowledge base and skill set that I have as a result of being heavily involved with domestic violence victim advocacy and gaining a lot of expertise about narcissistic abusers and other pathological abusers that are drawn to positions of power in society and in relationships, and kind of watching that play out. I've seen that play out in institutions before, but watching that play out on such a grand scale at a national level, and watching our country sort of go through this gradual frog in the kettle kind of acclimation to things that are not normal. Slow violations of norms and boundary testing over time, and watching it escalate. And I actually retweeted this morning something that I posted on the morning after the 2016 election, describing exactly that and how that was likely to play out, and it did. You can't psychically predict what the specifics are going to be, but you know that there are going to be some escalating things. And so when we saw that culminate in the big lie, in the Capitol insurrection, and we saw, it's never just the one person that's the abuser of power. It's all of the enablers that they draw to themselves. And people can be enablers with varying degrees of culpability. They're the active enablers, and then there's sort of the passive ones that go along with it. But for Georgia District 10 specifically, our current Congressman Jody Heiss tweeted out that January 6th was our 1776 moment, framed it as patriotism, and then voted to decertify the election. And now he has announced that he's vacating that seat, the seat that I'm running for, in order to primary Brad Raffensperger for Secretary of State, to be in a position to essentially, it certainly appears, to be able to fix elections, because Raffensperger wouldn't find close to 12,000 votes for Trump. But in the course of looking into who was running, I felt that we are in a similar situation that we've been in previous years, where we've got well-intentioned people, I think good people, but nobody that I see that is gonna have a path to victory or be specifically equipped to deal with whoever the Republican nominee is going to end up being, which it certainly appears to right now. Like there's 13 people, mostly white men, mostly who are arguing over who is the most willing to go along with these kinds of anti-democratic moves that are now, I met you in person on the steps of City Hall here just a few days ago, because that has touched us here in Athens with the state legislature trying to redraw our city council districts in order to oust 3 of our commissioners, instead of waiting for an election and letting the voters do that. So that's in as short of an answer as I can manage on why I'm stepping up.
So I did want to ask you what would be your most important policy priority if you did happen to win, because you never know what's going to happen when you put your name into the hat there.
The first one is stabilizing our democracy by securing voting rights and by getting abusers of power out of positions of public trust. And that includes political leadership, but that also includes things like law enforcement. I think that's an important aspect of the police reform conversation that's been taking place, is that abusers of power are drawn to positions where they can have power and control over people, where they can maybe have opportunities to do harm to people. And then they can also get kind of automatic respect and maybe an institutional cover to be able to get away with it. And so law enforcement is one of those careers where there's this minority of people. Most cops are not this way, but there's this minority of people that are drawn to that kind of setting, that maybe they are personally racist, or maybe they also perceive that the system is going to be more likely to cover for them if they opportunistically do harm to a Black person or a person of color. We can't keep electing people who are out to rule by minority coercive control instead of shared power. So there's that, and then I think climate change is another one of those existential issues that needs to be addressed. Those are kind of the foundational things, and then on top of those things, we deal with issues like fair taxation and living wages and universal health care, shoring up our public education system, the things that we all need for quality of life. We got to deal with the foundational things first, though, to be able to do that.
Yeah, sticking with voting rights for the moment. So I know that you know that it sounds like they're not going to reform the filibuster, so they could pass voting rights. And I'm talking about the Democrats, of course. When you hear people like Joe Manchin and Kristen Sinema saying that they don't want to change the filibuster to vote for that, how does that make you feel? And what do you think about the filibuster?
I have a lot of experience with procedural tools being used to avoid engaging the relevant arguments and taking the necessary actions that need to be taken. And I think that that's a favorite tool of people who want to control what's going on, is to play procedure instead of engaging the actual issues and getting called on it. So the filibuster seems to me to be an antiquated tool and something that isn't useful at this point, especially when there seems to be a policy of deliberate obstruction of any sort of legislation that would come out. So yeah, I'm disappointed about that.
Yeah, definitely. I know that you mentioned climate change. That's another thing I wanted to ask you about. So yeah, this is a really kind of a dark conversation so far, but I do worry that we're headed towards a disaster, for our children and even for ourselves. Like we're not that old, right? So given the scale of the crisis, it's kind of been a little shocking to me that there's been really no climate action coming from DC at all. So first, I wanted to ask you why you thought that was the case.
It's corporate money, I think. I'm kind of a hippie. I've been involved with local organic farming and teaching kids about solar power and doing different things like that. And locals, a lot of us, we want to demonstrate for climate change, and we want to try to make green choices ourselves and try to reduce our own carbon footprint. But we're limited in what we can do because the biggest emitters are corporations. We need, there are some things, there are some technologies that working class and middle class people would take advantage of if they were affordable. I can't go spend $70,000 on an electric Tesla right now. I'd love to install solar panels, but that you're talking about a big cash outlay. And so the systems that we depend on, to get to and fro from our jobs and to feed ourselves in practical ways, it's just really, really difficult for one individual to kind of go carbon neutral. And even if an individual could do that themselves, it wouldn't be enough of an impact to turn the Titanic around for what we're dealing with. And so, we really have to deal with that on a macro level, dealing with large corporations, manufacturing, the transportation sector that is producing emissions. And it has to be an international effort. We've got to stop putting corporate profits above human lives. We need to become a society that protects our most vulnerable members. So that's certainly a priority for me.
How do you think we should go about tackling this problem? Like, do you think sort of the market-based approaches like cap and trade or a carbon fee and dividend system, is that the way to go? Do we need to go like, full Green New Deal, for example, or really are we talking about this is an international problem? We really need progress on the international level. Is that really the best way to go about it? How would you prioritize tackling this problem?
I think it has to be multi-pronged. I like the idea of market-based solutions. I don't think that it's enough to just expect companies to get there by themselves. So I think we need to stimulate some, Green New Deal, whatever you want to call it, having large economic initiatives where we transition to green power and we create jobs in the process and we create business opportunities in the process. I think that can be a both and proposition. And it's got to happen. And it's happened, we have had big technology upsets before. When the automobile industry came along, it was really terrible for the carriage industry. Eventually the computers have been terrible for faxes. We've got to be able to move past what we've been stuck in up to this point.
Video killed the radio star, although now we're back to podcasts. So maybe audio is back now. But let's see, what else do I want to ask you about? Okay, yeah, so I saw your ideas on your website about living wages, and your tax plan was really interesting. Can you talk a little bit about that?
So I think you're talking about, I had some discussion about the top marginal tax rate, and I also had some discussion about living wages, that a one-size-fits-all solution is not necessarily the best way to go, because we've had the fight for 15. That's been in the rhetoric for years now. Housing is a lot more expensive than when people started, the fight for 15. And different parts of the country have vastly different living expenses. So I think that we need to be looking at, living wages that are tied to the cost of living in a given location, and that needs to be viewed as a fundamental part of a viable business plan. That if you're not prepared to pay living wages to your workers, that your business, you need to think about how to scale your business so that you're able to do that. I've also discussed some things like, there's this argument on the conservative side that, well, the minimum wage is supposed to be a living wage. That's for teenagers that are working after school jobs. I would be perfectly open to saying, hey, let's establish a separate first job student minimum wage for 16, 17, maybe 18-year-olds that are attending high school, and they are in their very first position. And those jobs can only be scheduled from 4 to 9 p.m. if it's on a weekday. And those jobs can only be scheduled for a maximum of 20 hours per student per week. Let kids get into the workforce and learn how to hold down those responsibilities. But you can't use that as an excuse for paying adults who are then trying to hold multiple jobs, and just physically ruining themselves just to barely make rent. That's a very dystopian scenario, and there's no excuse for it in one of the wealthiest, most prosperous countries in the world. So there's that. The top marginal tax rate discussion is another one where I think we can get really polarized instead of working on solutions. And I kind of enjoy calling bluffs in political rhetoric. And so you've got you've got some people on the left that are saying correctly that we've had top marginal tax rates as high as 94% in the past, and they were around 90-something% under Eisenhower, which a lot of conservatives want to harken back to sort of the halcyon mid-century days of America and prosperity. And so there are people on the left that say, hey, let's go back to those tax rates. Reagan slashed them, said it was going to result in a robust middle class. That is not what happened. We can look at the data and we can definitely see that has not been the result of those policies. So let's go all the way back to 90-94%. And to be clear, your viewers are pretty educated. They probably understand this. But when we're talking about marginal tax rates, we're not talking about a 94% tax rate on all of the money that somebody who's really rich is making. We're talking about up to a certain threshold, they're paying a different tax rate. And then if they're making more than, say, $10 million, $100 million, where do we want to set that? That would be the top marginal tax rate on income above that amount. But then you've got the conservative side that says, well, if you keep top marginal tax rates low on corporations and on individuals who have controlling interests in corporations, your Jeff Bezos and your Elon Musks and all those kinds of folks, then they stay in the country and they invest the money in economic development and they create jobs for everyone, et cetera, et cetera. I would propose a multi-tier top marginal tax rate system that is conditional on doing those things that the low tax rates are supposed to do. So instead of just giving a giant corporation a really low tax rate and then expecting that they're going to make living wage jobs, say no, the low tax rate is dependent on creating domestic living wage jobs. So you can't outsource all your work overseas. You can't pay poverty wages and then have your local workers going on taxpayer-funded assistance to make up for what you won't pay them. You have to actually do the thing that the tax rates are designed to stimulate you to do. And if you're contributing to society in that way, then you're going to pay lower taxes than people who don't. So I'd be really interested in looking at those proposals.
Yeah, I thought those are great. There's one more thing I wanted to ask about. It's kind of a topic that's sort of a pet topic of mine. I get really frustrated when people say that, our country is almost bankrupt and, something as basic as Social Security or the post office would be a struggle to fund for the long term in America. I was wondering if you thought there was any truth to that. How would you rate the fiscal health of the US in the 21st century?
Pretty bad, actually. From a perspective of revenue versus expenditures, pretty good in terms of what it could be if we would fix our tax code and deal with our issues. So yeah, the last time we had a balanced budget was under Clinton. And typically we've had Democratic administrations that tend to pull the country out of recessions, that tend to try to balance the budget or get us closer. And we've got Republican administrations that typically oversee recessions, and they still want to spend money. They want to spend it on corporations and rich people instead of social services that benefit regular people. They still want to spend money, but they want to cut taxes at the same time. So it's a little bit analogous to, say, a household that let's quit our jobs and run up the credit cards. Like, you can't do that. If you want to get into a fiscally healthy place, you have to raise revenue. You have to cut unnecessary spending, but you still have to have smart spending. And so, it's going to take a long time, I think, to sort us out. But I would like to get to a place where where we're solvent, where we have a balanced budget. Social Security is a good example. I mean, Congress has been voting to borrow from Social Security in order to fund things. And Social Security is upside down. It's being funded by current workers paying taxes that are then being translated into checks for workers that used to pay into the system, because the money that they paid into the system isn't there anymore. We need
it is there, and it's in bonds. It's held in U.S. bonds.
We interrupt this program with a public service announcement. You might be one of millions of Americans worried about their future Social Security payments. Well, don't. Your money is completely safe being held in the form of U.S. bonds in the Social Security Trust Fund. There's about $2.8 trillion sitting in the trust fund as we speak, and every penny is accounted for. No money has ever been taken from the trust fund by Congress or by anyone else, except to give it to the people who it's owed to. So, why do so many people believe that the fund has been raided by Congress? Well, it's been a wildly successful disinformation campaign that continues to exist as a mental virus infecting Republicans and Democrats alike. But don't worry, after hearing this message, you've now been immunized against the virus. Sleep well tonight, citizen, knowing that your Social Security money is absolutely 100% intact. You are owed this money, and they'd sure as hell better pay up. If they don't, I'll be out on the streets with you, shutting it the F down. Now back to our regularly scheduled program.
The people who say that we have a problem, well, those are the same people who are trying to cut all the taxes and they want to spend tons of money on the military, for example. But yeah, so that doesn't work, sure. But if you wanted to raise taxes on the rich, who have increasing, there's been an increasing disparity. It's getting ridiculous at this point. If you raise taxes on them, then sure, we'd have tons of money, right?
Well, people making hundreds of billions of dollars a year, if they were paying even similar tax rates to working class people, but what we pay on income tax, then we would have quite a bit more revenue coming in. And the people that are making that kind of money, they're not earning it by working. They have created a system that is funneling that wealth to them, and they're using United States infrastructure and all of the things that we have, from roads and bridges and police forces and internet that works and all of that, in order to generate that wealth. So giving back in the form of revenue is something that's reasonable to expect.
Yes, definitely. Well, that is about all that I had here. So is there anything else that you'd like to discuss? How can people get involved in your campaign if they wanted to help out?
Yeah, I would love to talk with people who want to volunteer. Definitely have space for everybody who would like to do that. They can contact me at jessicaforega@gmail.com and just tell me a little bit about their interests. So that's JESSICAFOREGA@gmail.com.
Okay, great. And for the last question, why don't you give us your closing statement? Jessica Fore, why should we vote for you?
You should vote for me because I may be the only chance that we have at a path to victory in a district that's gerrymandered 2-to-1 Republican. You should vote for me because I am an honest person who's from the district, who is getting into this to represent you, not because I want a political career. Yeah, and you should vote for me because I'm going to listen to my constituents and represent your best interests in Washington, D.C.
Thanks so much for being on the show. It's a pleasure to talk to you.
Yeah, it's wonderful talking with you too. Thank you so much.
Thank you to everyone who donates to support this show and all of the journalism we do at Athens Politics Nerd. There is so much to cover, I can't even get to all the stories that I want to do. I hope that one day I'll be able to expand and hire another journalist so we can bring you all of the local coverage that you deserve. Become a member at athenspoliticsnerd.com/join.